This call is now being recorded.
That was loud. ठीक है. Right. So all right, so here we are. So in the last class, if you remember, we have completed the digestion. Actually, what is happening in your stomach, intestine, that is something we have done. So how your food get digested and what are the organs and what kind of role they play, something we have covered in the last class. अब आज के क्लास में हम लोग क्या करेंगे, क्या देखेंगे कि आपने जो खाना डाइजेस्ट कर लिया, once the food has been digested and then it has been absorbed, so how that food particle will be used to generate the energy. बेसिकली आप जो भी खा रहे हो, जो भी आप कंज्यूम कर रहे हो, उसको आप ब्रेक डाउन करोगे अल्टीमेटली टू गेट सर्टेन अमाउंट ऑफ एनर्जी, राइट? एंड दैट प्रोसेस ओवर हियर इज कॉल्ड एज बाय सेल्युलर रेस्पिरेशन. So basically what will happen over here कि जो भी आपने digest कर लिया है खाना, right, what will happen, it will get inside the cell and then it has to be broken down in a very systematic manner so that you can generate a huge amount of energy. So that is the outcome of the cellular respiration कि आपको energy मिलता है आपके cellular respiration के बाद. So whenever I discuss something like a cellular respiration or whenever you get a term like this, याद रखना that simply means that आप यहाँ पे कोई बायोमोलिक्यूल को ब्रेक डाउन करोगे, जो भी आपने खाना खाया है उसको आप लाइक ब्रेक डाउन करोगे अपने सेल के अंदर to generate a huge amount of energy. So that is something you will find happening over here. So let's have a look. Let's try to understand what actually is going to be the outcome of my cellular respiration. So assume that, so we will take as an example of my glucose molecule. Right, so you have this glucose molecule. अब glucose molecule आपका cell के अंदर enter करेगा, right? So assume that it has been like formed after digestion. आपने जो भी खाना खाया था उसके बाद आपको glucose molecule मिला. That's the end product after digestion. Okay. Now what will happen? It will enter inside the cell. This glucose molecule will enter inside the cell. So that's what you will find happening over here. Okay. So you have to assume that that's your cell. A cell is not a cell until you have a nucleus over here, and you have a nucleus in this side on this location, and now you have a glucose entering inside the cell. So समझे मेरा glucose molecule है और ये मेरा cell के अंदर enter करता है. So now it has entered inside the cell. Now what will be the very first thing happening with the glucose? अब glucose जब आपका cell के अंदर आया तो हम इसे break down करने का सबसे पहला process आपके यहाँ पे क्या होगा? So याद रखना, the very first process which will be happening in the cell, that is going to be the glycolysis. That is your glycolysis. That is always going to be the glycolysis. So glycolysis is the very first step which will be happening inside the cell with the glucose molecule. So आपका glucose molecule आपका अंदर आया तो एक process हम यहाँ पे run करेंगे, एक reaction हम run करेंगे, which is a 10-step reaction, but at this level you don't have to know all the 10 steps. याद रखना कि आपका एक process यहाँ पे run किया जाएगा जहाँ पे आप glucose को break down करेंगे. Over here the glucose will be broken down. So whatever the glucose you have over here, the glucose which has entered inside the cell will be broken down, and by the end of glycolysis I will be getting something like my pyruvate. I will be getting something like your pyruvate. So this is what I get by the end of the glycolysis. और कितने molecule मिलते हैं मुझे यहाँ पे? 2 मिलते हैं. So I'll get 2 molecules of pyruvate I get after single glucose molecule gets broken down. So that is what I'll be finding happening in the cell. Now if someone asks you कि यार ये cell में कहाँ पे हो रहा है, ये आपका जो event हो रहा है हो कहाँ पर है, तो please याद रखना, this event is something which is happening in the cytoplasm. So this event is something which is happening in your cytoplasm. So within the cytoplasm, you will find the glycolysis is the very first process which will take place, and the end product is your pyruvate over here. Now please understand one thing very clearly, that glycolysis will take place irrespective of the presence of oxygen or not. Whether your cell has a presence of oxygen or not, you will find glycolysis will always takes place. So जैसे आपका ग्लूकोज अंदर आया आपके सेल के अंदर, चाहे सेल में ऑक्सीजन प्रेजेंट हो या ना हो, ये इवेंट तो आपका होके रहेगा. ये इवेंट तो आपका, ये प्रोसेस तो आपका होना ही है. और जब ये प्रोसेस आपका होता है, then you happen to get your 2 molecules of pyruvate. That is the outcome over here. अब आपके दिमाग में ये क्वेश्चन आ सकता है कि सर हम क्या ग्लूकोज को ही ब्रेक डाउन करेंगे? सो प्लीज अंडरस्टैंड वन थिंग क्लियरली, वी हैव टेकन एज अ ग्लूकोज एज एन एग्जांपल ओवर हियर. Your body, your cells can break down glucose, fats, and protein, all of them. But if given a chance, your body will always, or the cell will always prefer to use glucose first. So cells का पता है ऐसा like उनका priority होता है. So like they will initially look for carbohydrate to be broken down, then they will break down the fats, and then they will break down the protein. So अगर आपके बॉडी में कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स है, मतलब ग्लूकोज अगर आपके बॉडी में अवेलेबल है, तो पहले आप उसको ब्रेक डाउन करोगे. अगर वो खत्म हो गया, then the source of energy will be my fats. Then the cells will start breaking down the fats. एक बार fats भी आपके खत्म हो गए, then you will find your protein will be broken down. Then you will find the protein will be broken down. So please याद रखना ये चीज कि this is a sequence your cell is going to follow. This is a sequence your body is going to use. पहले वो ग्लूकोज यूज करता है, ग्लूकोज खत्म हो गया, then you use the fats and then you jump onto the protein. So that's how you are going to work, right? Over here we are taking as one of the example of my glucose and how what will be happening with that. So glucose आया, आपका यहाँ पे pyruvate बना, right, from the glycolysis, and this will happen in the cytoplasm, and you don't really need to have oxygen to make this happen. ये करने के लिए you don't need to have presence of oxygen. It will happen in the absence of oxygen as well. As I've told you, whether you have oxygen or not, the event will always takes place. So that is something you should know. Okay, तो ये बात आपको यहाँ पे याद रखनी है. So this something should be very much clear to you. Now once you find glycolysis has been done, जब आपको यहाँ पे glycolyze हो जाता है तो आपको यहाँ पे pyruvate तो मिलता ही है. Along with that you can also have couple of ATPs. Along with that you can also have 2 molecules of ATPs are also been formed. Now ATP is nothing but your source of energy. That's your energy currency. You know that. ठीक है, तो इतना आपको ATP मिलता है, ज्यादा कुछ मिल नहीं रहा है यहाँ पे. 2 ATP आपको यहाँ पे मिल जाएंगे. So 2 ATP is something you will be able to get over here. Okay, now let's move on to, so that is the first event which has taken place. Now let's see what will be happening after that. यहाँ पे हमने देख लिया glycolysis, ये थोड़ा explain किया हुआ है, but आपको इतना याद नहीं रखना. You just have to know that you will get a pyruvate in the end. Okay, now once you have the pyruvate, now let's understand what is the fate of the pyruvate. एक बार आपको यहाँ पे pyruvate आपको मिल गया, then what can be the potential thing happening with the pyruvate. Now this is something you have to understand. So let's see what is going to be the fate of the pyruvate, which can be also called as my pyruvic acid. Now let's assume cell does have a presence of oxygen, or let's keep it like this. Let's say cell does not have oxygen. So initially ऐसा assume करते हैं that there is going to be a absence of oxygen in the cell. So you have like absence of oxygen inside the cell. अगर ये कंडीशन है कि आपके पास ऑक्सीजन है ही नहीं सेल के अंदर, if that is the case you have over here, then you will find the pyruvate now will convert into something else or will undergo some other process. So दो इवेंट्स आपके यहाँ पे हो सकते हैं. अगर आपका ऑक्सीजन प्रेजेंट नहीं है सेल के अंदर, then दो पॉसिबिलिटी आपके यहाँ पे हो सकती है. एक आपकी पॉसिबिलिटी होती है जिसे हम कहते हैं यहाँ पे एज अ एल्कोहलिक फर्मेंटेशन. One is going to be your alcoholic fermentation. That is one event which can take place. And second event which can happen is going to be your lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation. Right, so these are the two processes you can find happening within the cell in the absence of oxygen. अगर ऑक्सीजन नहीं है, then ये दो प्रोसेस आपके यहाँ पे चालू किए जा सकते हैं. One is going to be alcoholic fermentation, other is going to be my lactic acid fermentation. ये दो चीजें आपके यहाँ पे हो सकती है. Now let's try to see what is happening where. Alcoholic fermentation में क्या होगा और lactic acid fermentation में आपके यहाँ पे क्या होता है. याद रखना ये दो इवेंट्स आपके तभी होंगे अगर आपके सेल के अंदर ऑक्सीजन नहीं होगा तो. And because of that, these two pathways become a part of my anaerobic respiration. These two pathways are going to be a part of my, you are going to call them as a part of your anaerobic respiration. They're going to be a part of your anaerobic respiration. तो ये चीज आपने यहाँ पे याद रखनी है. So that is something you have to know. कि both the process are a part of my anaerobic respiration. यहाँ पे इसे करने के लिए आपको ऑक्सीजन की जरूरत नहीं होती, and that is why you call them as an anaerobic respiration. Now let's try to see what is actually happening in the alcoholic fermentation. So वहां से हम देखते हैं what will be seen happening in the alcoholic fermentation. तो इसको हम समझते हैं यहाँ पे. as the name itself suggests that certain things must be getting formed over here. कुछ ना कुछ यहाँ पे आपका बन रहा होगा. So let's start to see that. So when we discuss alcoholic fermentation, this one thing is very much sure over here. There must be a formation of alcohol. There must be a formation of alcohol. So let's see what will be happening here. So you have a pyruvate. You have your pyruvate. And this pyruvate will now convert into your ethanol. Basically, आपके pyruvate जो आपके यहाँ पे होगा, इसको हम convert करेंगे into your ethanol. So this will ultimately convert into your ethanol. और जब आपका ये conversion हो रहा है, when the pyruvate getting converted into ethanol, at that point of time you will be finding there will be a release of CO2. At that point you will be finding there will be a release of a CO2 molecule. So this is a reaction which I will be finding happening in the cell. ये भी आपका होगा साइटोप्लाज्म के अंदर ही. आपका पायरुवेट कन्वर्ट किया जाएगा आपके इथेनॉल के अंदर, और जब ये आपका रिएक्शन हो रहा होता है, you will be finding a molecule of CO2 is getting released. Now to carry out this reaction, you will find some enzymes getting involved over here. Again, the enzymes are not to be remembered right now, but you have to know that this process will happen inside the cell, and when the process is happening, you will find there will be a release of CO2 during the reaction. Now there's one thing should be very clear to you. आपका जब इथेनॉल बनता है पायरुवेट में से, ये बनाने के लिए या ये बनते समय you will find only certain cells will be carrying out this process. Now you cannot find that happening in the animal cell. Humans में ये process नहीं होता. हो रहा होता, that would be a good thing, but that is not something you will find happening in a human being, right? You will find this event happening in someone like your yeast. You can find this event happening, taking place in the yeast, right? So these are some of the like fungi. You can have some bacteria can carry out the alcoholic fermentation, right? You can have some bacteria which can carry out this kind of process. But yeast is a common example. You will find in them the alcoholic fermentation can take place. If you don't find that happening in the animal cell, ये animal cell के अंदर आपको होते हुए नहीं मिलता. Now let's understand कि अगर yeast के अंदर ये process हो रहा है, तो वो टाइम पे आपका CO2 यहाँ पे रिलीज किया जाएगा, इथेनॉल आपके यहाँ पे बनेगा, and it does have a commercial importance. इसका हमारे लिए काफी ज्यादा commercial importance है. प्लीज याद रखना, ईस्ट आपका फंगाई है यार, प्लीज डोंट मिस आउट ऑन दिस. ईस्ट इज एक्चुअली गोइंग टू बी अ फंगाई, एंड ये बहुत ज्यादा यूज किया जाता है इसको इन द बेकिंग इंडस्ट्री के अंदर. इट इज बीन वेरी वाइडली यूज्ड इन द बेकिंग इंडस्ट्री. सो व्हाट इज हैपनिंग ओवर हियर, यू फाइंड द इथेनॉल फॉर्मेशन हैपनिंग इनसाइड द सेल of your yeast or a bacteria, and that will have a commercial importance. Now what kind of commercial importance you can have? You will find this event is been used extensively in making the something like your baking products. So baking product बनाने के लिए आप इस process का इस्तेमाल करते हो, which can be as simple as example like your bread, cake, or any other baking products, right? I think you must be knowing this. अगर घर पे भी अगर आप baking कर रहे हो तो then you are going to use your yeast. You will be using your yeast during the like baking process. So जो भी आपका fluffiness आपका आ रहा है केक का, जो भी आपका fluffiness केक का या bread का जो आ रहा है, that is all because of CO2 coming over here. That is all because of the CO2 getting released during the alcoholic fermentation. So that is one thing you have to know कि baking products बनाने के लिए आपका इसका commercial importance काफी ज्यादा है. Along with that, also other alcoholic drinks. जब भी आपकी कोई alcoholic drink बनाई जाती है तो उसमें भी आपका fermentation का इस्तेमाल किया जाता है, इस process का इस्तेमाल किया जाता है. So all the alcoholic drinks, right? Like you can have number of example like any of the alcoholic drinks, beer, rum, wine, all those alcoholic drinks are being formed with this particular process. सारे आपके alcoholic drink इस process से आपके यहाँ पे बनाए जाते हैं. So that is also one thing you should be clear with. So please याद रखना, this is an event I'll be finding only happening in some of the organisms. You cannot find that happening in the animal cell. And whenever this event is going to take place, alcoholic fermentation, there is a release of CO2. और यही CO2 बेटा होता है जिसकी वजह से आपको like you get the fluffiness in the bread. Okay. अब यहाँ पे एक क्वेश्चन आ सकता है. There is one question which can come in your head कि अगर ये मेरा प्रोसेस हो रहा है, अगर ये मेरे यहाँ पे प्रोसेस हो रहा है, then तो in that case we should also get a kick from eating a bread. वहां पे तो इथेनॉल बन ही रहा होगा. अगर ईस्ट अपना अल्कोहलिक फर्मेंटेशन कर रहा है ब्रेड बनाते के टाइम पे, तो इथेनॉल should be there in the bread somehow, right? And we all should be addicted to eating bread, right? But that won't be happening. See what happens now during the baking process, the ethanol will evaporate. The ethanol will ultimately evaporate. तो इसके वजह से you don't have the ethanol in the final product of the baking process, right? Bread हो या केक हो, so it won't have the ethanol. Okay, it only has over there the CO2 का impact वहाँ पे रहता है जो आपको fluffiness में आपको दिख जाता है. So this is something you have to know. in terms of your alcoholic fermentation. So please remember, you can have something like your beer or even rum. These are the alcoholic drinks. I'm just giving you a couple of examples which are being widely used, which have been very widely like this. Whenever these drinks are being made, you have to undertake the fermentation. So इतना आपको यहाँ पे याद रखना है. So these are the one thing you have to. So please remember, they do have a very significant commercial importance. And whenever the reaction will happen, there is going to be a release of CO2 which will be happening over here. तो इतनी बात याद रखनी है. And one more thing, this is all happening in the absence of oxygen. So let's assume you want to culture a large number of ethanol for medicinal purposes. So even for that, you have to ensure that तुम्हें ध्यान रखना पड़ेगा कि उसके environment के ऑक्सीजन ना हो. You have to ensure that कि आपका जो surrounding है जहाँ पे आप उन्हें grow कर रहे हो वहाँ पे ऑक्सीजन ना हो, तभी वो आपके grow कर सकते हैं. So you need to have that environment. Okay. So this should be clear to all of you. That is my alcoholic fermentation. Now let's move on to something else. So these are some of the example of my alcoholic fermentation. You can see over there, you can see the bread, you can see the wine, you can see the beer, right? You can see all those things over here, right? And then you have a lactic acid fermentation. So let's have a look at that. What is my lactic acid fermentation? What it is going to be doing? So lactic acid का सबसे बढ़िया आपका example हम यहाँ पे ले सकते हैं. So basically what happens in lactic acid fermentation, ना, there is a formation of a lactic acid. Simple. So in the lactic acid fermentation, you will be finding there is a formation of a lactic acid. यहाँ पे आपको याद ये रखना है कि यार ये बन कहाँ पे रहा है, where it is getting formed over here, because this is something which is much more important over here. So when we discuss lactic acid fermentation, so what is happening? So again you have a pyruvate. तो again यहाँ पे हमारा pyruvate हम यहाँ पे use करेंगे जो हमारा बना था after my glycolysis, and now this pyruvate will convert into my lactic acid. Now this pyruvate again will get converted into your lactic acid. Now, if someone asks you, "Kya ye lactic acid banta kahan pe?" So you can find them happening in the like some of the microbes, some bacteria can make that. But uske alawa, lactic acid can be seen happening, forming in the human beings. You can find this molecule lactic acid getting accumulated in your muscles. तो आपके skeletal muscles के अंदर आपको ये बनते हुए मिल सकता है. So see what happens now. If you are using your muscles extensively, अगर आप यहाँ पे अगर अपनी muscles use कर रहे हो, if you are using your muscles very extensively, then you will find there will be a formation of a lactic acid inside the muscle. So skeletal muscles के अंदर आपको ये बनते हुए मिलेगा. So skeletal muscles के अंदर ये आपको बनते हुए मिलता है. You will find skeletal muscles के अंदर आपको lactic acid बनते हुए मिलेगा if you are using those muscles extensively, right? अगर आपने देखा होगा तो even जब आप workout कर रहे होते हो, right? So even during doing your workout, you take your rest of 30 seconds or 1 minute to breathe yourself in, like you start gathering all the oxygen from the surrounding, right? And then you get back to your sets. जो भी तुम set कर रहे हो अपने workout को वो तुम करने लगते हो वापस से. So जब भी आपके cell के अंदर oxygen की कमी होती है, right? Assume that you are doing a very high intensity workout, right? Without giving a break of gaining the oxygen from the environment, then there is a likely chance that in your muscles there will be an accumulation of my lactic acid. और अगर ऐसा होता है, then it can lead to cramps. Cramps आपने सुना होगा. If any one of you watches cricket, तो आपने सुना होगा cramps is a very common term you find to be getting used in the cricket. ठीक है, जो विराट कोहली को जनरली कभी होता ही नहीं है. Even though he starts his inning from the 10th over till 40th over, उसको cramps नहीं होते. But generally you will see that people who like use certain skeletal muscles extensively, they have this issue of cramps. So cramps होने का एक reason ये भी है lactic acid accumulation. I won't say that is the only reason, but याद रखना cramps आपके lactic acid की वजह से आपका होता है. Okay, तो ये बात आपको यहाँ पे याद रखनी है that lactic acid will get formed inside the skeletal muscles in the absence of oxygen. So this all event is also happening in the absence of the oxygen. So this should be remembered. ठीक है, तो ये बात आपको यहाँ पे याद रखनी है. So that is why it is very important to have a like right balance of like rest and exercise so that you can maintain the oxygen supply to the muscles, right? And then only you can have कि muscles ज़्यादा अच्छे तरीके से वहाँ पे काम कर पाएंगे. So याद रखना skeletal muscles के अंदर आपको lactic acid formation आपको मिलता है. So ये बात याद रखना. Along with that, along with this, so this is one thing you can see, you have this lactic acid getting formed over here. Along with this, you can find lactic acid is also been formed by certain bacteria. which आपके bacteria आपके बनाते हैं lactic acid. So there are going to be few bacteria which are known to make the lactic acid. और उनको भी हम use करते हैं commercially. Even they have a commercial importance. So some bacteria जिनके अंदर lactic acid बनाया जाता है. So there is one bacteria known as lactobacillus. Lactobacillus. सो लैक्टोबैसिलस इज द नेम ऑफ द बैक्टीरिया, जिसके अंदर आपको मिलेगा देखने के लिए कि आप यहाँ पे लाइक इसमें ये बैक्टीरिया आपको बना के देगा आपका लैक्टिक एसिड। सेम चीज प्रोसेस तो आपका वही रहेगा, चाहे कोई भी कहीं भी बना रहा हो, पायरुवेट में से बनेगा आपका लैक्टिक एसिड। और जब ये बनता है तो उससे आपको कई सारी चीजें आपको मिलती है देखने के लिए। यू विल फाइंड नंबर ऑफ कमर्शियल प्रोडक्ट्स यू गेट, लाइक वन ऑफ द एग्जांपल कैन बी योर योगर्ट, दही जो आपका होता है ना, दही हो गया, योगर्ट इज द सेम थिंग, राइट? दैट इज समथिंग यू गेट बिकॉज ऑफ द दिस लैक्टिक एसिड फॉर्म बाय द लैक्टोबैसिलस। सो योगर्ट आपका एक काफी सिंपल आपका एग्जांपल यहाँ पे हो जाता है जो आपको कमर्शियली आप यूज करते हो। So they are some bacteria which will have some commercial importance because lactic acid का भी इस्तेमाल किया जाता है, ठीक है? सबसे कॉमन एग्जांपल आपका दही के अंदर, कर्ड के अंदर आपका इसे हम यूज करते हैं, ठीक है? So ये बात याद रखना। So please the first thing you have to know here is going to be about the skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscles are the one, they are the one in which you will find the lactic acid getting formed, and it will have an impact in affecting the movement or the activity of the muscle. Why? Because they will give the cramps and that is not good for you. I'll just tell you one more thing over here. लैक्टिक एसिड को लेके एक चीज मैं आपको और बता सकता हूँ यहाँ पे। एनिमल्स के अंदर आपको ये बनते हुए मिलता है, बट देयर इज वन एनिमल लाइक अ क्रोकोडाइल। क्रोकोडाइल के साथ क्या होता है कि क्रोकोडाइल में अगर लैक्टिक एसिड बनेगा, सो अगेन इफ क्रोकोडाइल यूजेस इट्स मसल एक्सटेंसिवली, बहुत ज्यादा अगर वो यूज करता है, और अगर उसके बॉडी में लैक्टिक एसिड बनता है, देन देयर इज अ लाइक्लीहुड कि वो लैक्टिक एसिड उसके हार्ट पे जाके हार्ट को डैमेज करे, राइट? और इट विल स्टॉप द फंक्शनिंग ऑफ द हार्ट and that can lead to death of the crocodile over there. I'll try to like see if I give you the example what happens ना, generally ये चीज का ध्यान रखते हैं वो लोग जो zoos में काम करते हैं, people who work in animal park or in zoo, they have to keep in mind कि अगर आप crocodile को बाहर निकाल लो खींच के, you have to ensure that वो ज्यादा physically exhausted ना हो जाए। अगर आपका crocodile बाहर निकल के डेथ रोल कर रहा है, घूम रहा है, फिर रहा है, ज्यादा physically exhausted हो रहा है, then there is a likely chance that there will be accumulation of lactic acid and that lactic acid can become fatal for the crocodile. तो हो सकता है कि वो बहुत बार लाइक फिजिकली एक्टिव हो रहा है बाहर निकालने के बाद, और अगर आपने उसे कंट्रोल नहीं किया, उसके अंदर जो लैक्टिक एसिड बनेगा वो जाके इट कैन अफेक्ट द फंक्शनिंग ऑफ द हार्ट तुरंत, एंड इट कैन लीड टू डेथ ऑफ द क्रोकोडाइल। सो ये चीज उनके अंदर देखने के लिए मिलती है। सो दैट इज समथिंग people take into account who work in the zoo as a animal keeper or people who work in animal parks. So you have to take into account, and even the people who do the animal rescue job, उनको ये चीज का ध्यान रखना पड़ता है कि when you take out the crocodile, you have to ensure that you restrain them quickly so that वो ज्यादा physically activity ना दिखाए. So that is one thing you have to know. So lactic acid fermentation याद रखना, यहाँ पे भी आपका पायरुवेट से ये सब होगा, and whenever you are making this happen, again the event will take place in the absence of oxygen. तो ये दोनों इवेंट मेरे लैक्टिक एसिड फर्मेंटेशन as well as my alcoholic fermentation are a part of my anaerobic respiration. So this is what you'll be finding happening in the absence of my oxygen. This is what you find happening over here. Now, once you are done with that, now let's have a condition जहां पे आपका ऑक्सीजन प्रेजेंट है। तो ये हमने देख लिया कि सेल के अंदर in the absence of oxygen क्या हो सकता है। Now let's have a look what will happen when you have a presence of oxygen. So let's quickly have a look at that. So let's see what are the outcomes you can have if you have the oxygen present. So if you have oxygen which is going to be present, then the story becomes slightly different. अब इस स्टोरी के अंदर आपका यहाँ पे इन्वॉल्व होगा आपका माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया. So now you will have an involvement of your mitochondria. So let's quickly draw a small mitochondria. ये काफी बड़ा हो गया. But let's draw mitochondria over here. So here you will have the mitochondria having the outer membrane and the inner membrane. Okay, the green one is the inner membrane. The green one, I'll just write over here IM. The green one is called as my inner membrane, and the yellow one over here is going to be my outer membrane. This is the outer membrane of my mitochondria, and this organelle in front of you is your mitochondria. Mitochondria, also known as the powerhouse of cell, is something which has been found over here, and the center part over here is the matrix. जो center में आपके यहाँ पे जो area है, this part, the center part over here is called as your matrix. Okay, now let's say you have oxygen within the cell. So cell के अंदर आपके यहाँ पे oxygen present है. So you have a presence of oxygen inside the cell. Now let's see what will be happening over here. Now in this condition, you will have your pyruvate. So over here you will be using your pyruvate, and now your pyruvate has to be converted into something else. Now what will happen? कि आपका जो pyruvate है, so pyruvate has been formed during the glycolysis. You know that. वो तो आपका तब के तब आपका बन गया था. अब ये जो आपका यहाँ पे pyruvate होगा, now this will enter the mitochondria. So now this pyruvate is going to enter inside the माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया। तो ये अब आपका एंटर करता है आपका माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया के अंदर। नाउ देयर आर टू थिंग्स यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड। अगर मेरा पायरुवेट माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया के अंदर एंटर कर रहा है तो आपके दो इवेंट्स यहाँ पे हो सकते हैं। टू प्रोसेस कैन टेक प्लेस विद इन द माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया। एक आपका होता है जिसे हम कहते हैं क्रेब्स साइकिल। वन प्रोसेस व्हिच कैन हैपन इन द माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया, जो सबसे पहला होता है, दैट इज कॉल्ड एज माय क्रेब्स साइकिल। That will be called as your Krebs cycle. And please remember, Krebs cycle will take place in the matrix. ये आपका मैट्रिक्स के अंदर होगा. So you will have first event happening in the matrix with my Krebs cycle. और उसके बाद एक और इवेंट आपका होता है आपके माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया के अंदर, and that event is called as my oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation. Phosphorylation. So you have two events happening. One is the Krebs cycle, this is my oxidative phosphorylation. The second event will be taking place in the inner membrane of my mitochondria. This will be happening on inner membrane of mitochondria. So these are the events which are happening when you have oxygen within the cell. तो ये events आपके तब हो रहे हैं mitochondria कहते हैं only when you have oxygen within the cell. Now what is the outcome of these events, right? अभी ये events जो ये काफी lengthy process होते हैं वो आपको like you don't have to understand them right now, but you have to know that when these two events are happening within the mitochondria, इनका outcome क्या है? So outcome जो आपको यहाँ पे मिलेगा, that is going to be huge amount of ATP. So जब आपका oxidative phosphorylation खत्म होता है, when you are done with oxidative phosphorylation, which will be happening on the inner membrane of mitochondria, you will be getting a huge amount of ATP will be formed. तो ये जब आपका event आपका खत्म होता है ultimately, तो आपको मिलते हैं बहुत ज्यादा अमाउंट में आपके यहाँ पे ATP. So you get to see a huge amount of ATPs are been synthesized by the end of this process. And that was the objective. अगर आपको याद हो तो यही हमारा objective था. The whole idea of breaking something systematically inside the cell so that you can generate a huge amount of ATP. तो आपके जो भी energy molecules बनते हैं वो इन दो events के बाद ही बनते हैं. Basically, these are the two events which will ultimately give me a large chunk of ATPs. Not the glycolysis alone itself, right? तो ये करने के बाद आपको ATP मिलती है और यही करने के बाद जो आपको ATP मिलती है जिससे आप अपना काम कर पाते हो. So जब आप खाना खाते हो, you have this sense of fulfillment, you get a sense of energy. That is all because of those ATP molecules. This is all happening because of the ATP molecules. और वो इसलिए हो रहा है क्योंकि आपके सेल के अंदर हम ब्रेक डाउन कर रहे हैं आपके ग्लूकोज को to give you a huge amount of ATPs. So याद रखना, आपका पायरुवेट जो आपका बनता है during glycolysis, in the presence of oxygen will enter inside the mitochondria and then undergoes through process and will give you a huge amount of ATPs are been formed, and this becomes a part of my ये बनता है, this event becomes part of your aerobic respiration. This becomes a part of your aerobic respiration. So याद रखना जब भी हम बात करते हैं aerobic respiration की, तो this is all happening in the presence of the oxygen. This should be clear to all of you. It is all happening in the presence of oxygen. अगर ऑक्सीजन है, then mitochondria का involvement आपके यहाँ पे होगा. Mitochondria will get involved and it will play a role in giving you a huge amount of ATPs. If you don't have oxygen, then you cannot expect any of the event happening. अगर आपका ऑक्सीजन नहीं है, then आप कोई भी इन दोनों में से कोई भी इवेंट आपके यहाँ पे होगा, वो आप कभी भी आप एक्सपेक्ट नहीं कर सकते. You won't find that happening. And that in that case, you will use a term like a anaerobic respiration. So ये आपको यहाँ पे याद रखना है. So over here, these are the two things you have to be very clear with in terms of my aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So are these two things clear to all of you? क्या ये दो चीजें आप सबको यहाँ पे clear है?
Yes, sir.
Right. So that should be clear to all of you. So these are the events which I'll be finding happening inside the cell in the presence and in the absence of the oxygen, and this should be clear to all of you. And please go ahead and ask a question. अगर कोई question होता है, then please raise your hand and ask your questions. So ये एक picture बना के रखिए, like we have this chart over which is going to help you out कि आप यहाँ पे हम करते क्या है. So in short, I'll just explain you this. Glucose will convert to my pyruvic acid, right? And then if you have oxygen is going to be absent, then you can find either ethanol or lactic acid can be formed, right? Via fermentation. ये दो events आपके हो सकते हैं. अगर oxygen आपका present है, then you will have acetyl-CoA will be formed initially, and then it will get into Krebs cycle, and then उसके बाद आपको oxidative phosphorylation होता है. So this oxygen presence के अंदर याद रखना, it will be happening inside the mitochondria, and you will find outcome is going to be a huge amount of energies will be formed. Okay, so over here you can see the in this picture you can see the glycolysis has taken place. You have formed the pyruvate, and then it has undergone alcoholic fermentation. तो यहाँ पे जो आपका हो रहा है, right? This is my alcoholic fermentation, जहाँ पे आपका CO2 रिलीज किया जा रहा है, and you are finding the ethanol is getting formed. So it's a two-step reaction. पहले आपका बनता है एस्टाइलडिहाइड एंड देन उसमें से आपका बनता है आपके यहाँ पे इथेनॉल. आप अभी याद रख सकते हो सिंगली डायरेक्ट इथेनॉल, यू कैन रिमेंबर दैट. So that is a picture of your alcoholic fermentation. Similarly, you will find you have a lactic acid fermentation जहाँ पे आपका single step के अंदर आपका lactic acid बनाया जाता है from the pyruvate. So what are the pyruvate you have formed can be used to form the lactic acid, and you find that happening in the muscles. आपके skeletal muscles के अंदर होते हुए आपको मिलेगा, but अगर ये बंद रहा है then it can affect the efficiency with which your muscles undergo contraction. So that is also one thing should be very much like you should be aware about. Now, so that is something you have seen. Lactic acid anaerobic respiration in human muscles during exercise when oxygen is inadequate, तब आपको ये बन जाएगा. Alcoholic fermentation in yeast. Alcoholic fermentation is used in the formation of beverages like alcoholic drinks, bread. Bread becomes puffy and spongy due to release of the CO2. So that is something we have discussed. तो ये आपका होता है during the alcoholic fermentation. These are the events you will find happening over here. Okay. This is a picture from your book. ये आपके book में से picture निकाल के हम आपको यहाँ पे दिखा रहे हैं. So you find that happening. 6 कार्बन एटम होते हैं ग्लूकोज के अंदर, एंड वो जब कन्वर्ट करते हैं पायरुवेट के अंदर, इट विल हैव द 3 कार्बन एटम्स. दैट इज समथिंग यू नो. नाउ लेट्स हैव अ लुक इफ आई एम एबल टू सॉल्व फ्यू क्वेश्चंस ओवर हियर. प्लीज रेज योर हैंड टू आंसर दिस. द फर्स्ट फेज इन द ब्रेकडाउन ऑफ ग्लूकोज इन द एनिमल सेल इज गोइंग टू बी व्हाट? जो सबसे पहला मेरा फेज होता है ग्लूकोज हम रन करेंगे एनिमल सेल के अंदर, वो आपके यहाँ पे कौन सा होगा? राजी, टेल मी व्हाट विल द आंसर ओवर हियर?
Glycolysis.
Yes, glycolysis is the correct answer. Yes, that is going to be the correct answer over here. बिल्कुल सही. Okay, then when the yeast ferments glucose, the product obtained are, जब आपका yeast fermentation करता है glucose के साथ ultimately, तो आपके यहाँ पे क्या outcome यहाँ पे हो जाता है? Razi has raised the question. Akrash, you can also answer this. क्या होगा इसका आंसर? Akrash. Akrash has decided मैं आंसर नहीं करूँगा. क्यों ऐसा Akrash? Why? Like बोलो. What will the answer over here? बताओ.
Sir, I think A, ethanol and CO2.
Why you said I think A? Agrash, tell me something. You have understood the complete thing which you have covered right now, Filal?
Yes, sir. But sir, I have to revise it. Okay, I don't really understand it yet.
All right. Okay. So you'll find yes, ethanol and CO2 are the products. Yes, these are the products I'll be finding. Which are the outcome for my like yes, that is what happens when the fermentation is being carried out by the yeast, right? Ethanol and CO2 आपके यहाँ पे release किया जाता है. बिल्कुल सही. Right. Very true. Then. Which of the following process converts sugar into alcohol? So over here, I can directly ask someone from out of any one of you. Can you tell me, Krishna, आप बता सकते हो? Can you tell me this? What is happening over here? Like, what is a process which will make alcohol out of a sugar? Okay, all right. Yeah, Razi, tell me what will the process over here?
So it will be fermentation.
Yes, that is going to be a fermentation. Okay, Razi, to also tell me one more thing over here. When the fermentation takes place, you will find, okay, ethanol has been formed, CO2 is getting released. Do you think fermentation can take place in the presence of oxygen?
Sir, by mistake, leave over the class, sorry.
Acha. Okay, but
No,
I guess
sir.
now you are back. Okay, all right, cool. Okay, nice. Okay, so let's talk about, okay, then this over here. Which of the following product are obtained by the anaerobic respiration from the yeast? So which of this product can be obtained from the like after the anaerobic respiration? Mukesh, आप बताना चाहोगे? Oh, Mukesh has left the class, क्या? Oh, yeah. All right, Akrash, what can be the? Okay, Krishna, tell us. Krishna, you tell us. What will the answer over here?
Sir, alcohol, I think.
ठीक है. All right. So क्या I'll let's help you out all of you over here. See. So पूछा कि कौन सा प्रोडक्ट आपको ऑब्टेन किया जा रहा है जब आपका एनारोबिक रेस्पिरेशन आपको हो रहा है फ्रॉम द ईस्ट, राइट? सो आपका आंसर यहाँ पे अल्कोहल तो होता ही है, बट अगेन अगर आप देखोगे बाकी के जो लाइक यहाँ पे ऑप्शंस है, दे आर आल्सो गोइंग टू बी समथिंग व्हिच यू गेट, राइट? You are also going to get, right? See, basically you will also go over here, you will also get the CO2 as well. CO2 भी आपका यहाँ पे रिलीज किया जाएगा. अब ये दो चीज अगर आपकी आ रही है, then you can also take into account कि अगर दो चीजें यहाँ पे आ रही है, then you can also take in like beer and wine as well, and then you will find your all of these becomes the correct answer, right? क्योंकि आपका अल्कोहल तो आ ही रहा है, and CO2 is also getting released over here, and beer and wine is something which you get commercially आप यहाँ पे obtain कर सकते हो. So yes, then you can have all of these as the answer. But yeah, alcohol is something you'll be getting over here, right? So these are the kind of questions they can ask you. These are the like very simplest kind of question they can put in front of you. Mainly you have to remember that what are the events happening in the skeletal muscles and in the absence of oxygen. These are the kind of things you have to understand कि क्या होता है और उसका impact क्या होगा. अच्छा, वन मोर थिंग आई हैव टू टेल यू कि जब भी आपके मसल्स में लैक्टिक एसिड बनेगा, दैट लैक्टिक एसिड योर बॉडी हैज अ पोटेंशियल टू कन्वर्ट दैम इनटू ग्लूकोज लेटर. जब आप रेस्ट कर रहे होते हो ना, जब आपने एक्सरसाइज कर लिया, जब आप आराम कर रहे होते हो, तो योर बॉडी हैज दिस मैकेनिज्म कि जो भी लैक्टिक एसिड बना था उसको कन्वर्ट कर सकता है वापस से ग्लूकोज के अंदर. आपके पास ये प्रोसेस किया जाता है, आपके बॉडी में ये इवेंट होता है. You have this mechanism through which you can convert that, but I don't find that happening in the crocodile, right? So that's why we have to take into account while handling the crocodile. Okay, now we have this next part which we'll be covering is going to be the human respiratory system, which won't be happening today because it's already time. It's already 6:20, 4:29 right now. So that is the thing which we'll have to start with in the next class, जहाँ पे हम लोग बात करेंगे आपके respiratory system के बारे में, how it works, what it does, and what are the possible complications you can have if you have any kind of like infection or something like that. So we can have a look at few things over there. In terms of breathing, we'll try to see that. ठीक है, तो ये हमारा next topic होगा जो हम लोग cover करेंगे. Right? Okay, now I want to ask you something. Do you want me to be at this tempo? इस pace पे आपको चलेगा, या आप चाहते हो कि थोड़ा और increase किया जाए, or you want me to कि नहीं चलेगा?
This is fine, sir.
Okay, ठीक है. I would ask the same thing for Krishna, Mukesh. What do you think? Is it workable for you, or you want me to like increase the tempo?
So it's fine.
ठीक है, Akash. All right. ठीक है. So that is something we have done. I'll just share a module with you. ये chapter का एक module share कर लूँगा. You can have a look at. You can go through the module. You can have few questions over there. You can have a look at the questions as well. So I'll make sure I'll make that happen. By the end of the day, I'll make that happen. ठीक है. So yeah, that's it from my end. So this was a lecture. This is what we have done आज के class के अंदर. Next time when we'll catch up, we'll be starting with the human respiratory system, and that is something we'll be covering. ठीक है. So now if you have any kind of question, then please go ahead and ask your questions. If you have no questions, then